Hi, everyone. I'm attorney Donna DiMaggio Berger, and this is Take It to the Board, where we speak condo and HOA. Have you ever encountered a problem in your condominium or HOA and muttered, there ought to be a law? Well, there are lots of laws that regulate the community association lifestyle, and more are passed each year, especially in a state like Florida with a significant community association population. Is it really possible that public policymakers can fully understand all the nuances of the community association lifestyle, particularly if some of them have never lived in a condominium or HOA? The reality is that legislators rely upon subject matter experts, stakeholders, and lobbyists to fill in the knowledge gaps when considering community association bills. Today, we're going to be talking about one piece of this puzzle, lobbyists, what they do, how they do it, and why community association leaders and residents need to know about this process. In the most basic terms, lobbying means influencing or attempting to influence legislative action or non-action through oral or written communication or an attempt to obtain the goodwill of a member or employee of the legislature. My guest today is well-known lobbyist Travis Moore, who has worked for both the Florida House of Representatives and the Florida Senate before joining the Governmental Affairs Practice Group of a statewide law firm. Following extensive work assisting various organizations successfully navigate Florida's governmental landscape, Travis established Moore Relations, Inc. I like that name. It's catchy, which for 2 decades has partnered with numerous clients to achieve positive outcomes in their dealings with both the legislative and executive branches of state government. Travis and I go way back when I was a registered lobbyist working on community association legislation, so I've really been looking forward to today's conversation. And with that, Travis, welcome to Take It to the Board.
Thank you, Donna. It's so good to be here. And yes, I remember those days fondly. And you taught me a lot about 718, 19, 20, and those were good days.
Actually, before we dig into the substance of the episode, I just want to say I remember first meeting you in Tallahassee, and I'm pretty sure you were wearing a bow tie and a seersucker suit.
I doubt that not. That probably was the case. I still wear the bow ties on occasion. Not as often as I did back then. I thought I would just wear them every day and it would be my thing. And not so much the seersucker suits. I didn't want to look too much like Tennessee Williams at some point in Tallahassee.
Is that part of the strategy, though? Was your wardrobe choices, was it part of an overall lobbying strategy?
It was. I wanted people to know, oh, it's the bow tie guy. Okay. And then associate me with something. And then it became community association work.
Well, let's talk about that. First of all, what was your path to becoming a lobbyist? I mean, when in college, did you know you wanted to be a lobbyist?
No, I was working in college for an insurance company, a national insurance company. It was right after Hurricane Andrew, and they'd set up a national claim service center. It was great job for a student because you could work all night, 4-hour shifts, 24 hours a day. And so working there, and then became involved as a heavily regulated industry, insurance. They were very politically involved and had a very active PAC, a political action committee. And we had people running for office and various office holders coming through. And I became part of that PAC process, delivering checks, and met a guy who was running for the Florida House and ended up winning in 1994 and started working for the Florida House at that time.
So I would say lobbyists, that's one of those professions that doesn't have the greatest reputation, like lawyers, car salesmen, everything else. Back then, what was the reputation or the perspective on lobbyists?
Certainly outside of the halls or outside of the process, it's still very much, as you alluded to, something that's thought of as either dirty or greasy or underhanded in some way, or there's just a bunch of payoffs going on. But that's not the case. It's advocacy work, especially when we're in a state that's, the third largest state in the country, but yet our legislators are constitutionally part-time elected officials. So unlike states like California and other large states that have these full-time elected officials and they pay them a salary that's commensurate with that time and endeavor. In Florida, it doesn't matter if you're in the House, the Senate, if you've been there a day or if you've been there 8 years, they all get paid a little over $29,000 a year, and that's it. So they are all doing other things. So their time and able to really focus on bills and on issues is limited. So they rely on outside sources a lot of times for that education and that advocacy.
Well, let's talk about that. a little over 29,000 to serve, and it's a 60-day session, a regular session, correct?
Right.
Part-time
Right.
legislature. How much do money of these people spend to actually get these elected positions? I think last time I heard one of the most expensive races was over $1 million, correct?
Oh yeah, yes. They'll spend over $1 million, well over $1 million in a state Senate seat. Obviously it's not their money. It's money that's come in from various contributions that they get, but they absolutely will, in one race, will spend more money than would be made, in a salary type of a situation throughout their entire 8 years. But it's for all kinds of different reasons do people get involved, but it's that ability or that desire to serve and be a part of that public body.
Is there any talk of actually transitioning to a full-time legislature here in Florida?
There is. In fact, there was a bill this year again that would have provided raises across the board for the governor. It would have applied not to the current office holders, but going forward. And would have significantly raised the salary of the governor, of the cabinet officers, et cetera. And then there was an amendment discussion, and then ultimately withdrawn about, we need to really think about raising the salary, because otherwise you're going to end up with people that are either independently wealthy, or the only people that are going to end up running, or there's going to be an issue where there's a problem of they're going to get a job and be hired by an entity that they're ultimately responsible for some oversight of.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a discussion about that. It didn't go anywhere this year, but over the last being in part of this process over the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years, it's gotten much more vocal with people saying, look, we really do need to look at again, not for us as current office holders, but going forward, how we can have a kind of a better system in place for members.
So you're very well known in Florida, Travis, for being the condo and HOA lobbyist. How were you drawn to that area?
Well, the law firm that you alluded to in my introduction, and thank you for those kind words, one of their clients was a CAI. It was a small client for that firm, but it was Community Associations Institute. And they kind of gave that to me. They thought, well, this is a small, not-for-profit kind of thing. Nobody's going to get really hurt if you don't do a great job on this. So they kind of gave that to me, the low man on the totem pole kind of thing. And so that was really from that. Then other client issues kind of came forward, whether it be management companies, whether it be other practices such as the work we did together on sprinkler retrofit issues, et cetera. It kind of expanded from that. But the first one was CAI, which I still have to this day.
So let's talk about this last session. Okay, it's kind of a throwback to when I was going up to Tallahassee, which was 2005, 2006. 2007. Remember, we flew up the planes with people. Yep. There was some significant legislation that was being proposed back then. And this past session, we've seen again some sweeping changes. Maybe just walk us through some of the significant bills that were passed this last session.
Sure, and I agree that I think we're going to get back to the days when we're going to have to bring up the busloads of folks again. Tallahassee is not an easy place to get to. Nobody wants to leave the pickleball court in the middle of April or March and trudge up to Tallahassee. But I really think that, given some of the things that have happened and that we've seen pass, I think that might be the best course of action, because it really does make a difference when they're looking at these owners and these volunteers as they're passing certain bills. I guess really to talk about this year, we have to just kind of briefly mention the last couple of years. We had the disaster there in Surfside, and you can't have the third worst building collapse in the history of the United States, after 9/11 and after the Oklahoma City bombing was the Champlain Tower South. And I think everybody would agree that there was going to be, and it was expected to be, and there should have been some kind of reaction to that. The approach in the Florida Senate after that was, building inspections. It was, we all know that as a building's being built, there's all kinds of, the building departments in there, they're dealing with permits, they're dealing with inspections, they're dealing with, checking things off before the next party, comes in and starts the next trade begins their work. But then after that building is built, unless there's an issue that gets raised, nobody's really inspecting these threshold buildings, except for in those two counties, Miami-Dade and Broward, which have that the recertification program. So the Senate thought, okay, let's just kind of focus on, we're going to make that statewide. We're going to go, instead of 40 years, we're going to make it a 30-year deal. And that's the approach they had. The House took a different approach because their leader on that bill was from Miami-Dade and said, no. This happened in one of the two counties where we had an inspection program. It's not inspections. It's the fact that these people are not maintaining the buildings. If this had been a single owner, let's call it a Marriott, a Hilton, whatever, an apartment complex where it was a single owner, then this maintenance would have been done. You would have been charged now $329 to stay on the beach instead of the $179 a night. Nobody would have cared. They would have paid it. You would have gone forward. But when you have, buildings and associations where you have to get, 100 participants, 100 owners to sign off on maintaining the building, it becomes a different situation. So their approach was, nope, we're not so much even worried about the building inspections. We want to make sure that people are doing the maintenance on these buildings. It's too easy to waive. People are just waiving. So we're going to deal with it that way. And throughout that first session, right after the Surfside disaster, there was this impasse, and they left before the 2022 election, having passed nothing.
The regular session ended without anything, right? Bills related to CTS.
Exactly. And so, going into an election year, the Miami Herald and other, they started hearing, well, you mean you were there and you spent 60 days, you didn't do anything on insurance and you didn't do anything on this. So they called a special session, was called, and they came back to deal with insurance. And while they were there dealing with insurance, they thought, you know what, there's a nexus between insurance and building safety. So we're going to be able to pass this bill at that time. But again, instead of taking either the House approach or the Senate approach, they kind of came up with this weird Frankenstein. You could see the stitching. It just didn't work, kind of put it together in 48 hours. And while it was nothing new that hadn't been around during the regular session that had just ended a couple months before, it was just not right. But that bill passed. So that became 4D. And it was really so they, by and large, they could go back and kind of say, well, we passed something. So then they had to come back last session, during the 2023 session, and pass what was Senate Bill 154, which was kind of the glitch bill, kind of the Condo 2.0, and make some adjustments to even make it workable. It still needed work, but it was a start.
And Travis, let me stop you right there, because
Sure.
During that same session, there were also bills that were entertained and a bill that was passed that reduced the statute of repose in Florida,
Correct.
which is the longest statute of limitations you can rely upon to go after contractors for construction defects. And one of the things that I've said for a long time and several times on this podcast is safe buildings start with the people who build them, right?
Right.
So, if you start out with a construction defect, you already have a handicap in terms
absolutely.
of maintaining. So to a lot of people, I think it looks like the Florida legislature at times can be a little bipolar on this issue, because on the one hand, it's a very worthwhile goal to say we want to have the safest housing stock possible, while on the other hand, we're kind of chipping away at all the consumer protections to go after, shoddy construction.
Right. And it was a complete lack of understanding on how, common interest ownership or how associations work, that associations do not have the standing until turnover to do anything, that it's being controlled, that association is being controlled by that developer who's controlled, who is the board, who's controlling the sale of the units, that all sides and every side. And the association can do nothing but wait. And then, okay, you're now given the ability to run this your way and to go and to get your own inspections and do your own due diligence. And then but by the way, by the time we gave it to you and now you can kind of check our work, you're not able to bring any case. I mean, the statute imposes, time ran out.
So do you feel like our legislators, their eyes have been opened now on this particular issue?
Yeah, I do. Yes, on that issue. And the thought was not for single family homes. And I know, we have a lot that are in HOAs, but certainly as it relates to condominiums, as a building, to build a building in a 40-story tower, that's a whole different operation than building, 1 and 2, maybe even 3-story homes. It's an entirely different process. And they did agree that certainly for condo associations, the trigger or the start date should start at turnover. So one of the good things, maybe the best thing that happened in one of the bills this year is we did make that fix, where for condo associations, the statute of repose timetable, that clock doesn't begin until the association had everything turned over to them as far as control and gone through that turnover process.
This year we had Condo 3.0, which is kind of a misnomer because it really does not follow in the same path of 4D and 154 because the focus is not as much about milestone inspections and the structural integrity reserves, other than to say if anybody was waiting for extensions, they didn't get them.
No, and I think the way I kind of look at it is this condo bill, this quote unquote Condo 3.0 was not a sequel to the first two. It was a prequel in that the bulk of the bill it was definitely and absolutely a pre-Surfside piece of legislation. I mean, this was dealing with, and the reason for that, I guess, it is when the legislators decided, okay, we're going to now take the show on the road and do a series of these town hall meetings, which primarily were in the Tri-County area after the passage of 154 to kind of say, this is what we did. They got into these meetings where, and I was there, where people would say, we're not allowed to talk at our board meetings. We just sit there. We're told what to do. And then the other half of the room said, oh my God, you guys are lucky. You mean you have meetings? We don't even have meetings. So all of this stuff got written down. And so that's why then the legislature decided, all right, we're going to end up in a system starting in 2025 where there's going to be a lot more money in the system. There's going to be a lot more things going on. We want to make sure from managers and conflicts of interest with managers that we have a better foundation. And oh, by the way, nobody likes DBPR. We're getting nothing from them for the $4 a door that we pay. And so they said, we're going to go back and fundamentally fix some things as it relates to transparency, fix the system so that when we now put on top of that, this new world of not being able to waive reserves, et cetera, there's going to be a better system in place and a regulatory scheme. But yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. Don't kid yourself. This was not oh, wait, we don't have enough inspectors and people to do this work, and we don't have enough people to do reserve studies. When, this deadline of December 31st, 2024 hits, there's going to be a significant number of associations. The vast majority of associations are not going to have done the things that are needed to be done.
So I sat on a panel with one of the bill's sponsors, and, it seemed like she's going to be, as you say, checking the list, looking at the list, checking it twice. She's going to find out who's naughty or nice. What's going to happen to these people who haven't actually made the deadline? They haven't performed their milestone inspection on time. They haven't gotten their structural integrity reserve study done. We
tried to say, kind of like in 154 with the milestone, where you could go to local government, the local building department, and say, look, I've got a contract. I'm not ignoring this. I know it needs to be done.
Good faith effort.
Right. I'm not going to get it done by this. Can I have until, March? Look, here's my contract. Here's when they're coming. We said, let's do that for this, what's called the SIRS, the Structural Integrity Reserve Study, and say, hey, because I'm being told by the largest and a lot of these reserve study folks, if you do not have your contract to have us ready to go by like July, we're no longer going to be able to guarantee that we're going to be able to have it done. If you're not in the queue by July, there's no guarantee. You're probably not getting this done until after the deadline. So we wanted to say, if they at least have that contract, are they going to be okay? The House said no. Literally the example they use, we don't want this to become the fire sprinkler retrofit thing where the can gets kicked down the road and it's 20 years and nobody's done it, et cetera, et cetera. We want these to be done. Practically speaking, DBPR is not going to be able to enforce this. The people that they are to hire to do the checking of the list aren't going to be in place until they can't even be hired because the money doesn't happen until July of it. Should the governor sign this bill, the effective date is July. That also is the fiscal start of the new budget. So the money that's put in there, that's appropriated, they're not able to hire anybody until July. By the time they get them hired and trained and all that, we're looking at the end of the year, certainly well into the fall. I think it's going to be one of these things. Have you shown an effort? I don't think the regulators are going to run around and say, we're fining you. It's going to be, where are you? Can we get this done? Do you have a contract? Kind of more of a help to get you to do it rather than an enforcement.
The positive news is I'm hearing from the vast majority of our clients who are, again, when we're talking about threshold buildings, we're talking about buildings that are 3 stories or higher. They're on it. They've already hired their engineer for the milestone inspection. They've hired their reserve company for the structural integrity reserve study. Many of them have already gotten back those results. Many of them have already got the maintenance and repair projects underway. Although I will tell you a recent story, a smaller, older building, most of the people on fixed incomes, they've got, the city has reached out and said you had a deadline to do some of these repairs. We reach out and say, who's going to the municipal hearing on Monday? And the response we got is all 4 members of the board have had cardiac events and are not capable of attending the meeting. I don't know if it was the stress.
Wow.
What was going on?
Did they all look at their insurance bill at the same time?
I don't know if it was that or whatever, but each of them had a heart attack. I mean, it's terrible, but each of them had a heart attack and couldn't make it. The city was kind enough to give them an extension. But moving on with the new Condo 3.0, really focuses on board members' fiduciary duty, transparency, and punishing bad behavior. So, and then even in somewhat punishing things that may be seen from an owner's perspective as bad behavior may not necessarily, like I'm thinking about document inspections, may not necessarily be malevolent, may just be a function of not being able to organize the process or somebody not knowing whether a management professional is handling that process or the board is. So can you talk to us about that aspect of the bill?
And I think that this also, after the disaster, and then also we had which I would consider the kind of a physical disaster. We also had this financial disaster of associations like the hammocks, and those owners, as we started at the outset, those owners did show up in Tallahassee numerous times at numerous committee meetings. They were there saying, along with, the state's attorney's office saying millions of dollars were stolen from these people. And, yes, we don't want to criminalize. Sally was on vacation, didn't get the notice to give somebody, something within 10 days. Yes, she should not get hit with a misdemeanor. But these are things where there was like willful, knowing intent to defraud kind of stuff. We also had that going on. So, which is why we see a lot of this from the HOA bill that passed in the HOA setting, also in the condo setting, where we were putting these criminal behaviors. I will also say that in these town hall meetings where, I would make the argument in years past of, well, if you do this, you're going to have nobody serve on the board.
Right.
As I'm in these meetings, we had people were saying, I can't serve on the board. They've run these elections in such a way that I would love to run for the board and I can't. So the argument that for many years was, if you do this, you're not going to have people want to volunteer in this capacity. The policymakers were also hearing, oh, well, we actually have a lot of people that want to serve on the board and they're saying that they can't.
But why couldn't they? But let me stop you there. Why couldn't? Who's preventing them from running?
Well, this one story was, there was a gentleman so he had said, I'm retiring from the board, or I'm not going to run for the board. So one other person in the association said, I'm now going to put my name forward to run in the board. Well, the board didn't like this gentleman. They, it was a kind of that consummate troublemaker in the association that we've all heard of. And so then that guy, right towards the eve, not literally, but figuratively, the eve of the election, the gentleman that had said he was retiring was like, the board said, well, we can't have just a ballot go out with this one guy's name on it. You got to come back and put your name on it. So they were saying things like, we think that if you decide and you say you're going to resign and you have turned in a letter of resignation and you are resigning from the board, that you should have to at least sit out a year. You can't just come back because you don't want somebody else being elected. And so you got to kind of thwart somebody else's effort. So it's those kinds of weird stories.
And there's always those kind of machinations, but there's already processes in place, Travis, where you can, mount an election challenge.
Right.
If there were, if there were any shenanigans, that's been the law for years that you can, any owner can petition the division and challenge the election.
And that is one of the things, there's only a handful of things post turnover that the division could get engaged in, but that election issues is clearly one of the now 4 because of the reserve study stuff, things that they could do post turnover. One of the things that was changed in this bill was essentially to kind of get rid of that sentence where there was this in the law, as you well know, 718 probably better than anybody in the state, but it has this whole bunch of things that this is what the department's going to do and can do. And then it had kind of this sentence, not going to quote it exactly right, but it basically said, however, upon turnover, the division really only has jurisdiction over these 3 things. So the division would say, oh my God, we're 92% of our cases are closed. It's because they would get the letter. They would quickly look, is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 3? Nope. You're closed, case closed.
Yeah.
So,
well, now they have more money and they're going to have,
so now they will have more money
positions.
and like 65 more people.
Right. But I want to get back to your Sally example with, we don't want to hit Sally with a criminal penalty if she failed to comply with the document inspection. That example is very important in terms of how carefully legislation is drafted. And you and I have talked about this previously. Like you mentioned Frankenstein. You got a great idea, you send it off to Senate bill drafting, and it comes out like Frankenstein's monster for some reason.
Right.
When you talk about willful, there's a rebuttable presumption. If you botch 2 of these inspections in a 12-month period, it's willful. So this is where we get concerned when we're looking at the actual language that is used in the law, whether or not, we're really addressing the Sally example where there's no malevolence involved. It may be a time issue. And one of the things that I've brought up to the bill sponsors is, look, we saw this with Ian out in Southwest Florida. In one of our communities, a person made 3 document inspection requests in the 4 weeks following Ian when they were still pumping water out of the units. And neither the manager nor the board were able to comply with that because it was literally all hands on deck trying to dry out the units because that building had been completely flooded. I really do hope that there is an exception made to add that to the statutory emergency powers where, we can have some reasonableness injected into this framework.
Right. And I think that you will find that there are even to kind of, I don't want to say a stopgap measure, but even as a measure to kind of get us to the next session, which won't be until March of 2025, where we can make some of these additional tweaks and changes and clarifications, really. There already is discussion going on now with DBPR as far as they have rulemaking authority where they can't promulgate a rule that goes against what statute says, but they can, and statute is, you can fit all the volumes of Florida law can fit right across the width of your computer kind of thing. There's only, it's not a huge amount of documentation. Whereas the Florida Administrative Code, because every state agency has the ability to promulgate rules, that would fill up an entire, office. It's massive. So I do think we're going to see where there are some rules promulgated by DBPR to that effect, saying it's not considered a willful neglect of your duty if you haven't done this due to these circumstances, et cetera. And it's something that certainly I think you and other members of the section, the real property and trust law section of the bar will be involved in to help kind of craft what that should look like and give that over to counsel at DBPR, because I think that's going to need to happen again as we go into another hurricane season, et cetera, to provide clarity so that associations just aren't frozen because they don't know what to do.
Listen, you've been in the room when all of these bills are coming together, all these ideas are coalescing. Is there ever any conversation about the flip side, which is bad owner behavior? We know there's bad board behavior. The hammocks is the worst case where you've got fraud, misdeeds, financial improprieties. That's the worst. Even the best is some boards are just operating with a level of informality that's not conducive to running an association with a large budget. So even the ones that aren't trying to be bad, they're probably way too informal, handshakes, not enough meetings, not enough transparency. So we know there's bad board behavior, and actually we welcome the legislative oversight to get these boards to understand their roles. But is there ever any conversation about the bad owner behavior and whether or not our shared ownership statutes should address that?
Yes. And I'll give you an example. I was in a meeting in one of those very meetings you described, small conference room in the Capitol. If there had been a smoke machine, it would have been that smoke filled room. And I handed over a file that said, it was a thick file. And I said, this is the correspondence just in the last year from one owner in one association where you literally, these people are just getting buried with, there's got to be some kind of limitation on this. The response was, yes, we need to look at that. Maybe the website requirements now, by putting them down to, as this bill does, from 100 units down to this 25 units for condos and then 100 parcels for HOAs. They're saying, that might help in that regard where it's a records issue, because the association can simply say, here, it's on the website, go to the website. We're not, we don't have to continue to deal with this. But I do think it's going to take, as I said at the beginning, more people going to either these town hall meetings, to certainly to legislative meetings, to say, because right now it's clearly 99% people that are having these issues with their association, perceived or real. That's what's being discussed. Whereas we need to be able to have some folks saying, look, I'm a volunteer member of my board. I am trying to do the best I can. And to tell some of those other side of the stories, because I'm thinking the sway has gone too far, if that makes any sense. And I'll end this comment with this. 2 weeks ago in the morning, I was doing an update in Newport Richey, Florida. And I went, and these were just nice Midwestern. It was a room at the Newport Richey City Chambers. It was, a lot of people there, but they were just interested. They just wanted information. They were just nice folks. Then I drove, and that night did a meeting in the city of Aventura, and I thought I might had swerved into a Cirque du Soleil. I don't even know what was happening. It was crazy town. And I tried to say, and I had 3 legislators there. I was supposed to moderate just this panel of these 3 legislators. And I kept saying, can we just explain what happened? And then I promise we're going to do questions. Well, that didn't work. They just wanted to ask the questions when they wanted to ask the questions. And so then I said, okay, can we at least then have a new rule of wait till you get the microphone? Please, because
how'd that work?
Everybody was yelling. I can't hear the question. So I'm like, so it just dawned on me, because it was at the same day, just kind of also the difference we have in the state, where a lot of issues I think that might be in certain parts of the state or in certain communities are not indicative of what's happening everywhere. But yet when we pass a state law, it's going to impact every single association.
So that's a great segue. Is there resentment in other parts of the state when they feel like a regional problem has resulted in statewide legislation that really they don't have this problem, but now they've got, 10 more hoops to jump through because of a regional problem?
Yes, absolutely. I have a gentleman that is he's researching the Dakotas and how they figured out how to come up with a North Dakota and a South Dakota, because he goes, somehow we need to come up with a North Florida and a rest of the, the South Florida and the rest of the Florida, because that's a different, that might not be just a different, state, but that's a different country, maybe even a different world down there. So yes, there is resentment that, hey, and then there's also this micromanaging through 718, which really kind of goes against this philosophy of lawmakers in other areas of their work, where it's this, we're the free state of Florida, you know best.
Unless you live in a condo.
Right.
And then free's not so free.
Well, that or if they're going to, preempt local government, they don't think local government knows what they're doing. And so they've thought, well, associations are kind of like a form of local government. So we're going to tell you, we're going to dictate exact how you're going to handle your finances, how you're going to handle all of these issues. And I think that there's going to need to be, again, I don't want to say a pause, but I think let's figure out what we have now. And then also, are there some unintended consequences and some things we need to maybe back away from or clarify?
Look, there's nothing more local than short-term rental issue. I had somebody on from Texas, and they've dealt with the preemption issue there. And again, Florida's a huge state, 67 counties, third most populous state. Down in South Florida, Miami Beach wants to regulate them. Up in my partner, Jay Roberts, up in Fort Walton Beach, they love short-term rentals because most of them, that's what they do with their properties.
Right.
But to your point, you made a really significant point, Travis, which is, look, it's important for our public policy makers to hear from both sides of the table. So right now they're home, make an appointment, they're in their district offices, go visit your legislator, talk to them about the challenges of what it means to serve on these boards. I hear that old, everybody's going to fly off the boards. I don't believe that. I do wonder if you're going to get some people on the boards who are a little more, they're okay with risks. I think the more risk averse people may say, I don't know if I want to, I don't know if I want to serve on the board. I think you'll always have people willing to serve on the board. I wonder if you might have some people that it actually attracts people who are, a little more comfortable with risks.
Yes, the two things that I see is that where we need more involvement from, there was during the vacation rental issue in the past, not on this year's bill, but in the past, there was a older gentleman, actually his name was Bubba, from a moderate community in Palm Beach. And we're sitting there in the committee meeting with, a whole room of dark suits and bow ties and well-coiffed hair. And this guy was wearing shorts and he showed up looking like he literally had just been pulled off of the pickleball court, and he was pissed. And he was like, I can't believe that I'm having to stop my day to come up here and deal with you idiots. And it changes the way they all sat up, because when I talk, they're used to me and they're used to me advocating. They're like, okay, well, yeah, but you've got lawyers and they're used to that. So if we can get real people, that's that issue. And then another issue that I really see coming down the line is the issue of termination. There's a issue as it relates to the kind of, again, this perfect storm of the need to have reserves and the insurance costs and all of these. And there's buildings that are 50, 60 years old that I think I've heard policymakers say they've just reached the end of their useful life. And there's developers who are, they're not trying to screw anybody out. They're saying, look, you go and get an appraisal, We'll give you 2-3 times what your appraisal says. We just want you to take it, vote, terminate the building, get out, and then they're going to come in and knock down the building and build something where they can charge, where the units are now $1.2 million to start. That's the issue that I see coming, is this changing of the landscape and how we deal with, and there's been some cases and other things where how we deal with termination, not from that almost that kind of that imminent domain where it's being forced upon an association, but even where an association wants to do it, how are they able to with counsel and with others walk through a thing that, a way that works for them. Those are issues that I'm already hearing about. I've
attended numerous meetings recently, older, a lot of cooperatives too, because some of the oldest housing stock in Florida along the coastline, Travis, were cooperatives back in the 50s and 60s. So gorgeous locations, older buildings, a lot of people on fixed incomes, and they're right now evaluating offers from numerous developers. Again, you have to balance the competing interest, which are you've got some people like, I'm never going to be able to afford to live on the coast again if I leave this place. Even if I sell, I don't care if they're giving me double, or I hear this, if they're giving me double or triple, where am I going to be able to buy and walk right out of my little efficiency onto the beach?
Right. It's like the rent control in New York City that you're familiar with.
It's 100% like that.
It's like that. And then there are associations where there's a day of reckoning coming where if they've systematically waived maintenance and they've kept their association dues at, $300 a month for 5 years and it's never changed. And we did a study of 200 associations, which I have, and it's an interesting study that it was, high end, low end, coastal, not coastal, all over the state. And the average, if the association had been maintaining reserves, when they plugged in how the new reserves scheme will now work, it was about $60 a month more for them. But for those that had not been doing any reserves and they had to play catch up on all of these components, it was well over $160. It was like $183 a month more for them. So there is that coming. There's no question. And then I also think at some point it does not work to have the insurance structure the way we currently have it now, at least for condominiums. Single family homes, I do think that there's some new companies coming in and fine. But I'm seeing, if you're on the beach, if you're more than 4 stories, if you've got more, a significant number of rentals, it's like, no. So like literally you have to be a condo that's sitting in Ocala, where that's a garden style 1 story, then yes, you can get coverage from something other than Citizens.
Well, it is going to involve people making different housing choices. It is. Right. I mean, when people say, where are you going to go? Just to your point, you're probably going to have to move inland. You're probably going to have to go to a garden style, or maybe even a small single family home. These are going to be tough choices that a lot of people, I don't know that they've actually come to grips with it right now as we're recording this on April 4th. I don't know that people have come to grips. I think as we get closer towards the end of this year and into 2025, these stark choices are going to become more real.
And I begged for changes from an insurance standpoint this session, and nothing substantial was done. I mean, yes, we passed the My Safe Florida Home Program pilot for condos, but not substantively as far as the actual insurance policy availability and affordability. And my thought is if the forecasts turn out to be correct and it is an active year and there is a significant storm, I mean, I think they're going to have to sprint to Tallahassee to basically do the things they told me, a few weeks ago. No. So because I just think that once it starts affecting, Florida's whole economy, the whole house of cards is predicated upon the real estate market and people moving here, selling the family home in Michigan and Ohio and in Connecticut and moving here. And when we get to the point where sales can't happen because you can't get insurance for a condo, unit, that's where policymakers are going to start making some different decisions.
Well, this also involves the affordable housing crisis that we've been talking about. That's been a running theme on the podcast as well, which is, we've got all these Fortune 500 companies moving into Florida. We've got Michelin-starred restaurants coming in. Where are all the service people going to live in Florida right now? But I want to touch on omnibus bills with you because, listen, the latest Condo 3.0 is 140 pages, okay? And I've actually bumped up against the challenges of omnibus bills trying to explain it to the media who may say, oh, you opposed this bill. Well, the bill was what we call an omnibus bill, which is a huge bill, and it was a mixed bag. It had good things, it had great things, it had atrocious things in it. So one of the questions is if you can explain, why are we constantly stuck with bills that, you have to look at it and go, God, I love that provision in this bill, and I hate this provision in this bill. And now I have to make a decision overall whether or not I can support it or I have to oppose it.
Right. And then it's not just us. I mean, I know I've been talking to even the governor's office because the governor does not have line item veto on anything other than the budget. And there's a concern about a portion of the bill that's something that was part of another bill that ended up in this bill. And it's almost like you have to take the whole thing, the whole cake or whatever the analogy you want to use. And you're right. So the way legislation is drafted or put together and constructed, it's got to be, single subject, and it has to be germane. If they're going to add something else to a bill, it has to be germane either by title or by chapter. So in other words, if it's an act relating to insurance, you could have things in there as it, relates to auto insurance and car insurance and, health insurance. Like you could have a whole bunch of things. And that's by title. The other way is by chapter. So if a bill opens up any portion of like 718, then that means anything else that's in 718 is automatically germane. So even if you had a bill that only dealt with 718, 111, 11, but then something else came along and it was, 718, 0.112, it's still, even though it deals with a different area of condo law, it's still germane to that bill. So what typically happens is there are legislators get these ideas from, constituents. So, I've got all these constituents that are concerned about this issue. So they file a bill about it. So that's how we ended up with this HOA bill. And it was parking, and it was vegetable gardens, and it was, clotheslines and all kinds of stuff in there, speeding and things. And so they said,
I'm sorry to interrupt you because I want you to tell us how the sausage is being made. So legislator hears, and then walk us through the process. So, who drafts that bill first? So then if it's coming from a legislator such as the HOA bill, this was a sponsor that, just heard these things from various constituencies, groups that were upset at their HOA, not an attorney. So they then just basically put together, kind of a bullet point. I want to deal with parking or slap suits. The people can't speak out against whatever. They then give that, if they're in the House, to House bill drafting. House bill drafting is a group of attorneys that are, these are not political. These are your paper chase attorneys. These are the ones highly technical attorneys. Highly technical.
They're not trying to advocate or push one thing or another. They are literally just saying, this is the idea you have. We will now figure out where in 720 that needs to go. Then it goes to staff. So then there's staff attorneys with various committees, and they do have, quote unquote, an agenda more so. They will get and say, well, I don't like what you're doing with this. And they usually bring in different stakeholders, and I have to go in and I have to argue a point on this and that. And then they present their staff analysis, and the chair of that committee then makes the decision. And really in the House, it's very top driven. So the chair really is going to hear from the speaker's office whether or not this is something we want to really do or not do. So I will use the HOA bill as an example this year. There were two big HOA bills that got filed. One was filed by the representative who represents the hammocks. I mean, like, it's so big that I think like 2/3 of his voters are all like in the hammocks. So it's one of these things where he doesn't get the hammocks right, he's not coming back. So he filed a continuation of the bill that he had last year that did not, it passed, but without criminal penalties and other things. So he wanted to expand on that. Then there was a bill that was filed from a person out of Southwest Florida who had heard from all of these things, doesn't like HOAs, doesn't think HOAs should exist, and said, I'm just going to draft and that was the original version of 1203. Meanwhile, in the Senate, the president's office and the president spoke to a sponsor over there and said, look, the House really wants to do some HOA stuff. We've been doing condo stuff. You've been the point person on condo stuff. They really want to do some HOA stuff. I'm not sure how crazy we want to go, but I want you in control of it, because if you're the sponsor, you're going to be able to kind of you decide what you want in it and what you don't. So they filed what was known as two committee bills. And one of them matched up, it was 7044. It matched up with the one hammocks bill, and one was 7046 that matched up with this other. And it didn't go nearly into liens and all of these other things. But I met with the bill sponsor in the House. I said, this is kind of crazy. Well, we're going to fix it. We're in anything. It ended up getting worse. So I went back over to the Senate and I said, this is not getting better. It's getting worse. Both of these bills are up now in a committee for you. I really think that one bill probably doesn't need to go any further. And if they can get things right, and you'll still have another vehicle that you can continue on in session and give it a chance, the one that matches up with the other bill that's a little bit better. So that was the decision that was made. They decided, all right, we're just not going to hear essentially the companion to this 1203. Well, the House didn't take too kindly to that and decided, well, we're going to just merge everything into this 1203, and that's what we're sending over. So they did. The Senate said, well, we're not doing all of that. So they undid it and they said, essentially, we'll give you a couple of things, like the issue regarding law enforcement, first responder vehicles, because we kind of dealt with that in HOAs in the past. And I'm like, that's fine. That's fine. Things, the things you can vote electronically. In order to vote electronically, you have to say in writing, not electronically. I would like to vote electronically. What we changed in the Condo Act and in the Cooperative Act, I said we should go ahead and just change it in the HOA Act to say, if you want to vote electronically, you can let us know electronically. Mm-hmm. Seemed like a no-brainer. I'm like, give them that. I don't care. So we ended up sending over, we took, because the House version of the House 1203 was already over. So the reason why it passed is 1203, and some people are concerned because originally that 1203 was like a horrible disaster. They stripped off all of the language of 1203, put essentially the language of 7044 with a couple of the other things that they gave, put it onto 1203, sent it back over to the House, and said, look, you can take it or leave it. They had some discussion about leaving it and saying, well, it's not enough, we're not going to do anything. And I'm like, that's fine too. But they ended up saying, all right, we're going to concur. And at the very end of session, they concurred with the Senate amendment to 1203 and passed it, and it'll go to the governor.
Is that how this typically shakes out, Travis, that the Senate kind of has the firm guiding hand with what passes? Yes. And that's on a lot of issues. The Senate is usually kind of the break. The House thinks of themselves as like the idea people. Like, we get elected every 2 years. We're in tune with the people. We're more rambunctious. We've got all these ideas. And the Senate's like, let's be a little bit more reasonable kind of thing. Yeah. That's a broad brush, but that's
if I was giving a political science kind of a course, that's what I would say. Yes.
Well, as I'm sitting again, listening to you, and bill drafting is so crucial. One of the things I'm thinking, not that I'm advocating for any drafting attorneys to reduce their ranks, but I'm wondering if AI can help with drafting in the future.
Yes. And now also, so one of the tools that I subscribe to is a thing called Lobby Tools. And it now has this AI summary feature that the only glitch or the problem is it summarizes the original bill really, really, really well, surprisingly well. But then it never goes back. It never gets updated. So the original summary does not match up with the bill as it passes.
With all the committee substitutes.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what leads some legislators to want to make this their cause celeb when it comes to association legislation? Because we see this, right? And even the bill sponsor this year has said she's going to be back every year with, Condo 4.0, Condo 5.0. What do you think is...
Well, in the House, that sponsor, lives in an area in South Florida, in Miami-Dade County. She lives in a condo, and the vast majority of her constituency are condo residents. So she also, this is just something, that she, if you were living, in the middle of the state somewhere, you probably would listen to the ag committee, the ag industry more so. So that's her natural, because it's, and she'd been given that by leadership. They said, look, you're somebody that lives in condo world. You have a lot of condos. And quite honestly, it had been, and it's getting less so, but Republicans were not in the condo areas. It was more Democratic leaning members, because it was more city and more. And so, again, less so than now, but they decided, this is good. A Republican in condos. In the Senate, it's different. So the senator there is Senator Bradley, who she just happened to be chair of the Community Affairs Committee that deals with the building code when Champlain Towers happened. So all she wanted to focus on was the milestone inspection. She just wanted building safety, threshold buildings. And quite honestly, her original draft and original approach was any building. It didn't matter what was going on in it. If it was more than 3 stories and it was an apartment, an office, a hotel, a building as a building kind of thing. So she was chairing the committee when that happened. She might maybe have one condo in her entire district. Her district is a huge, very rural district in Northeast and Central Florida that has way more prisons in it than associations. I mean, it has more cows than people. Her bill before that was on, farm equipment and stuff. She's an attorney. She did a good job with kind of negotiating that. And because, quite honestly, the Senate or many legislators run from association issues. I
always thought they saw it as a headache.
Right. Yep. If she was willing to do it, they're more than happy to let her do it. Yeah. So they were like, fine, you do it. You take it. And the thought was when they were doing the Champlain, the Surfside response, it was, we're going to pick somebody that if she pissed off a lot of people, literally nobody's in her district going to care. Not one person is going to come to her office and say, we're voting you out. She's going to lose. She could do whatever she wanted and nothing is going to happen. Whereas the House took the approach, no, we want somebody that's literally in these issues dealing with it. And so that's just kind of been the difference in approach that we've seen from the two bodies that we have to kind of work through. Again, I'm leery of, the kind of Condo 4.0. I'm like, what else are you going to do?
Oh, that's what I was going to ask you. If you had a crystal ball, where do you think we're going to be headed in the next few years in Florida when it comes to condo and HOA legislation?
I really do think the pendulum is going to kind of swing the other way, because I think people are going to say, I can't afford to live here. Now, I will say that I have been in meetings with members where it has been, look, if they can't afford to live there, they need to get out. I also know that developers, like we talked about, are very powerful, and they're saying, we don't care about these buildings. We want the land. The land is what we want. So we want you gone so that if you're a legislator that's listening to developers and that's more your bent, then I think you're going to say, look, if the pain is so great and they leave, that's what we want them to do. Fine. But I really do think that we're going to start seeing in Southwest Florida, in Naples, in the Panhandle, in Central Florida, and in other places where it's going to be, hold on, fine. We had to do something. We all want safe buildings, but now I think we're going too far. And I do think that there's going to, people before were like, we're going to, and a lot of this, you and I talk about this stuff all day long. There's still a lot of people that if we were to say, have you done your SIRS? They're going to think, what is this, the Army? Like, what is that, an exercise? What are you doing? So they don't know. So I think as they start to be told by their counsel, by their managers, by others, oh, by the way, this stuff is, I think they're going to start, because I'm getting more and more calls from legislators that are saying they have no idea what's in these bills. That's the other thing. That's the other thing, Donna. I would say out of 120 House members, there might be maybe 2. And I was in a meeting with one of them and she did not explain things right, that know really what's in these bills. Right. So that's the other thing, that as they learn, as more and more are learning about this, there's
the silent majority is being what they're awakening to what's going on.
I agree.
And they don't reach out typically to their legislators. To your point a few minutes ago, they're hearing from people who are having problems, and these are legitimate problems in communities, but the silent majority is not, taking
right. Nobody's going to a town hall meeting to say, I just am coming here to say, wow, thank you. I mean, you're not happening.
So Travis, do you live in you don't live in a condo?
I am the president of my association.
Are you kidding? Oh,
no. I am a townhome with 24 units, and nope, I'm a 720, and I'm like, people, we are fine. Right.
Well, yes. I assume that helps you when you're speaking to legislators, that you are actually living this lifestyle.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, and I can't. I got to tell you, I have to pick times when I can go to my mailbox or the dumpster, because Natalie in 203 was waiting to talk to me about something all the time. I'm in the dead of night leaving my house because
I love that you're walking the walk and talking the talk, Travis.
Yeah. And I will just one other quick thing about sausage. So the reason why it's 100 parcels for HOAs is because
to have a website, to have a website,
right? 100 parcels to have a website is a very, very, very powerful. It was going to be 25 too. It was going to be 25 because condos were going to be 25. But a very, very, very powerful member of the House said to me, no, I have 92 parcels in my HOA. It's going to be 100. And I'm like, 100 it is. But it's that kind of literally that granular thing we're dealing with. The one county that has an exemption in this current vacation rental bill is because a very large association, I won't mention their name, but that's in Flagler County, happens that their state representative is the Speaker of the House.
Travis, we saw that back in the day. Yeah.
And they said, sir, they talked to him. They had a meeting and they said, we want to be exempt. And that is why of the 67 that you mentioned, it's not random. Oh, you know what? Flagler County, let's give them, they deserve something nice. No. And that's why.
We saw that back in the day with the grandfathering of rental rights under 718, 110, 13. The Senate president had a friend who came down and that friend said, oh my, what do you mean I can't rent out? So,
right. That was like 2004. You're right.
Yeah. It is scary to see the sausage being made. So we're going to wrap up because I've had you so long on the show now, but I want to ask you, what is one of the biggest misperceptions about what you do as a lobbyist?
That we just hand over a bunch of money and then we get whatever. It's a pay to play. You just buy your access. CAI and the vast majority of my clients, whether it's Oceana, the Florida Native Plant Society, Defenders of Wildlife, Animal Legal Defense, these are all 501c3 organizations. They're not-for-profit organizations. They can't give money. So The commodity that I trade on, if that's the proper way to describe it, is on knowledge, being able to say, I'm going to keep you from stepping into something that's going to be bad, but also being able to say, I'm speaking on behalf of millions. We talked about the fact that we have over half of the state's residents live in some type of common interest, or whether it's condo, co-op, HOA. And so if we're able to say, close to 11 million people are having to live, are being impacted by this, that's huge.
So I know you have to do something in your downtime because you have a stressful job. And I believe, are you still acting?
I am. I have even moved a little bit into some theater producing and directing. But yes, I try to do a show based on the schedule and everything. I try to do a show, at least one show a year. So last year in the fall, actually I did two, because I did one in January and then one in October. So I finished that one off in October, and then we started, with committee meetings and stuff. But yes, it's all still communication, but it allows me to get away from dealing with, at no point in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof are you dealing with milestone inspections.
A true Renaissance man, board member, actor, lobbyist,
and can tie a bow tie. So
and can tie
right.
Those were tieable bow ties.
Oh, absolutely. A true gentleman. Sartorially, I would not be caught dead with something that I'm clipping around. I mean, this isn't prom 1986.
I am so glad you clarified that.
Yeah. Well,
thanks for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Good to talk to you, and hope to see you in Tallahassee again soon.
We'll see. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to follow and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, or visit takeittotheboard.com for more ways to connect.